Yes.
I want to pick up on some of the things that you said in response to Mick. And it's prompted by a concern of how realistic is the utopia you describe. And you used the term semi-autonomous for the relation of capital and science. And I think government is a third entity. It's really a triangular relation that became clear. You used to tend to distress the autonomy of science. And I'd like to hear more about the semi part. What are the limits and conditions and non-autonomous factors? It strikes me that in the most utopian site in the talk, you took us into the workings of the NSF panel. And we saw highly intelligent, highly principled, serious people making consequential decisions rapidly, but in really justified and long-visioned ways. What you didn't mention was the decisions are about funding, and there's an awful lot of money at stake, and that money comes from somewhere, and it doesn't come from science. And all of the strings that are attached and conditions that follow from the fact that what's going on is huge amounts of cash are changing hands, and lives are being changed as a result of that, and the people who supply the cash are not present at the table, except in the consciousness of the people who are making those decisions. And I wonder if you'd say more about the ways in which that affects the relative degree of autonomy.
Sure. What's interesting about this NSF cash is that it's public money. So that if you think of government as the group of people that is gathered together, tax themselves, that it is the biggest company of all, and yet it's publicly owned, then that's already a kind of a utopian situation. And it does take huge amounts of capital to run science, new research now, and capital exists in a capitalist system. So the autonomy is semi at most. Maybe it's deci autonomy. There's not a whole lot of autonomy there, but what is there, you have to think about what most of these projects were going towards, especially at NSF. They were going towards biomedical research. They were going towards human welfare of one sort or another. They were trying to make the world better for human beings, and make the world better for human beings in both senses. Make humans more healthy, make the biosphere more healthy, and it was public money doing it. So I think you can make a very utopian description of what's going on at NSF. But it does exist. I mean, it's only $5 billion a year in a multi-trillion-dollar economy. And in a $5 billion for the National Science Foundation, $700 billion for the Pentagon. So that's the kind of dynamic in which I am placing this. It has to be acknowledged. It's why the humanities and the leftist project generally has to help theorize and support science as its utopian side, as its biomedical, human health side, as opposed to the military, the control and dominance side. And it has to be seen as a site of contestation. Government is a site of contestation. Science is also, in a way, in terms of aiming it towards one or the other. If the biomedical budget was $700 billion and the defense budget was $5 billion, and there are countries in the world where that proportion obtains. In the social democracies of North Europe, they don't spend a whole lot of money on a defense budget, and they do a lot of health research. So these are, I don't think I'm being unrealistic. I'm trying to describe the situation in a way that gives us things to do, is what it comes down to, I think.
Yes. In the monetary hierarchy that you described, the humanities are not even on that map of the billions and millions.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, I'm wondering if you could say more about your sense of how the sciences and the scientists feel in relation to people doing work in the humanities. Because you at one point suggested that the humanities was perhaps the brain or the value system. So it was almost like you weren't sure which organ. It was going to be the heart, or the mind. And I have this image of, the call for the humanities to bear gifts, but who will be receiving, and will they be happily receiving the gifts? And how do you see that sort of obviously the NSF utopia, the meeting at the table of the scientists thinking about artistic projects was one moment. But I'm wondering if you could just tell us more about how this could unfold.
Yeah, it's a process of slow diffusion, but let's think of it this way. The concept of the paradigm does not come from within the sciences. It was the humanities that thought up the concept of scientific paradigms, and that is diffused into the sciences and has affected scientific practice. So I will take that model of modeling as our model for what to do, and try to provide science with a sense of what it's up to that is as powerful as that one, that it has its ultimate effect on them. If you think about geology before plate tectonics theory, you have a hilarious science in disarray, in that they can't explain anything, they can only describe, and so they are pre-paradigmatic. And this is the situation in all too many sciences, and maybe you could even say that science as a whole, before you had paradigm theory, was pre-paradigmatic and didn't know what it was up to. So in this sense, the humanities, through a process of slow diffusion, it's still important to have philosophy. Because otherwise we don't know what we're up to or why. And science doesn't provide it. It is not in itself philosophical, except in the limited sense of we've got a method and it works. We put these strange adherences to work and we find that we have powers. We can't explain it. I wish we could. So many working scientists are simply saying, I don't know how the humanities people can speak as confidently as they do about anything, because they are radical skeptics and they're just quite uncertain of why anything works. On the other hand, they're willing to listen. It's nice to have a paradigm. It alters the science completely. Geology can explain the history of the Earth in a way that is just quite astonishing now, talking about where the continents were billions of years ago and where they will be in the future. It's a beautiful thing. And when you look at before plate tectonics, it's quite hilarious because you couldn't even tell if mountain ranges. One theory was that mountain ranges existed because the Earth had shrunk and therefore the skin of the planet had buckled up like one of those strange shiatsu dogs. The other theory was that the Earth had expanded and had allowed magma to shoot up in the cracks of the expansion and create mountain ranges. So the two competing theories, both of them completely wrong, and yet they were desperate for any explanation. Why should there be a mountain range? So this is my story to try to, an analogy, or an allegory of how we could go forward. We need to provide the paradigms. And as for the arts, you know, the National Endowment for the Arts has like less than $1 billion a year to spend, but the notion in our culture is that the arts are either superfluous or else they need to pay for themselves by convincing the world that they're worth it. That in other words, that there shouldn't be state support for the arts. Now, in the social democracies, you see a little more state support for the arts, and you see more interesting arts. If you go to Europe, any night in any small town in Europe, there are 3 or 4 unbelievably avant-garde and interesting artistic events happening, not being recorded, never going to be remembered. It's just that this is an extremely rich culture, astonishingly rich. Well, the whole world could be like that, you know, there's still this weird European bleeding of the world phenomenon that is a kind of like the echo of the 19th century, and they exist as a, I don't know, some kind of California of the world, the edge of history problem.